Welcome to Adam's Gardening Guides and a very warm welcome to my garden. As spring moves into summer, it's time to start planning for those flowers, fruits and crops that we'll be enjoying over the months ahead. This is a lovely time of year as days are getting longer and generally warmer, encouraging us to spend more time in the garden to enjoy the very best that late spring has to offer, as well as focusing our mind on exactly what crops and flowers we want to grow in pots and baskets, in our borders, as well as on the veg plot and in the greenhouse over the months ahead. And the sunshine has brought the early flying butterflies out too, like this beautiful peacock butterfly I spotted feeding from the bluebell flowers on a local woodland walk. I've been enjoying many flowers around the garden too, like the pearl bush, Exocorda macrantha, the bride, with its arching stems festooned with white flowers. Rhododendrons are coming into their own now, like this striking pink variety, Cosmopolitan, bold, brash and flamboyant. And aren't those early flowering clematis superb? And even a tiny garden will have space for the compact clematis avalanche. Doesn't it look wonderful? Or for a larger garden and more space, look out for Clematis montana and its many varieties. They really will stop you in your tracks when they're in full flower. And as the flowers on one plant fade, the next wave of flowering shrubs will take over. There's Choisya with its wonderful scented white flowers. I have Choisya ternate in my garden, more on that later, and also Choisya Aztec pearl, which has narrow finger-like leaves for a slightly daintier display. Then there are the equally fragrant lilac varieties that grow into bold shrubs, almost small trees like Stunning Sensation, or a favourite in my May garden, the Korean lilac Syringa palibin. I've often seen lilac partnered with laburnum, providing a perfect contrast to those magnificent trailing cascades of golden flowers. And from these brilliant flowers you can see why it has got the common name of the golden chain tree. And of course there's blossom on fruit trees and ornamental trees, including cherries and pears and apples like crab apple Malus red sentinel that my neighbour has in their front garden, which forms large red fruits into autumn that birds love feeding on through into winter. Crab apples are a great garden tree with real wildlife value. Then there are the pretty frilly pink blossom on flowering cherry Prunus canson. Simply breathtaking when at their peak, but more on fruit blossom later in this video. I must mention a lovely evergreen laurel I grow in my garden too. I've grown a short hedge of Prunus autolycan for years, trimming its shoots regularly through the year to keep it neat and compact. But as we come into May, just look at these lovely upright candles of white flowers. Aren't they gorgeous? And a new flowering shrub I've just planted in my raised acid bed in my garden. This is a compact azalea called Hortino Garden Evergreen White, just coming into flower, and I'm really looking forward to watching more flowers open over the coming days. In fact, all around my garden I have early flowering hardy perennials coming into flower. Look at these lovely blue flowers on Centaurea, the mountain cornflower. Delicate, wispy petals joined together at their dark centre. If you're looking for a hardy perennial with a really long flowering season, then look no further than the perennial wallflower Bowles Mauve. It starts flowering early, around April in my garden, but even earlier in warm districts. Continues growing bushier and taller and producing a succession of flowers right through summer and into early autumn. And the bees love it too. It's not a long-lived perennial, but easy to propagate from cuttings. Scabious butterfly blue is coming into flower, and you can see why it has the common name of the pincushion flower when you look closely at these gorgeous puffy blooms. And one of the first hardy geraniums or cranesbills to flower in my garden is Sabani blue, with this intense deep blue, almost black veining running down each petal. I'll enjoy this early disflower, but cut back the plants right back to their base after flowering to promote new growth and further flushes of flowers later in the year. And there are flowers developing in the shoot tips of hydrangeas too. And it's not just flowers, as my displays include many glorious foliage plants. My pots of hostas have all burst into new growth, sending up their colourful new foliage, and I know I'll have to keep the slugs and snails away from these to preserve their pristine appearance. My Hortonia is grown in a pot, as it can be quite a spreading and invasive perennial if grown in a border. Mine is a variegated variety called Chameleon that grows well in a pot in a shaded position, but there are other colourful varieties too, like Flame, with these beautiful red markings on its leaves. It loves moisture, so do keep it well watered. And all the Japanese maples are now bursting into full leaf too, with these first leaves often having the most intense colours, creating impressive displays. So keep watching this video, as later I'll be showing you how I planted a new Japanese maple in a pot. I've got lots to cover in this video, so please do like the video with a thumbs up and subscribe to my gardening channel too. It really does help to support Adam's Gardening Guides. Thank you. Coming up, watch out for lily beetle eating your lilies. How to plant up pots for colourful summer displays. It's time to prepare your plot for summer crops, so I'll be putting up my climbing bean supports. What to do if you find plain green shoots ruining your beautiful variegated shrubs. How to grow strawberries in pots for tasty summer pickings. And much, much more. So let's get started by looking at one of my favourite trees for small gardens. I love it when the new leaves unfurl on my lovely Japanese maple. This is Acer aureum. The buds were quite pink when they start to swell, and then they burst open and the leaves open this beautiful palm-shaped golden colour. This looks lovely, especially through spring into early summer, with the golden leaves putting on a really lovely display. As you go through the year, the leaves can go a little bit greener, but you get a lovely display of autumn colour as well. Japanese maples are a really valuable addition to the garden, and even in small gardens you can usually find one which you can grow in a pot, or if it is a little bit too big, like this one of mine, you can plant it out into your borders. And it produces a lovely feature tree, a small feature tree that looks glorious month after month after month. My pergola garden arch has got trellis panels on either side, which I train climbers up. I've got a pot of clematis coming up nicely there on the compact dwarf varieties. But here is one of my favourite climbers, a very fast growing perennial climber called the golden hop. Humulus lupulus aureus, lovely Latin name. It's got aureus meaning gold because the new foliage, look at that, gorgeous golden colour. It gets greener as you go through the season, but the new leaves that develop have got a wonderful golden colour. This has got a slightly sort of sharp, abrasive stem to it, but it twines and climbs its way up through the trellis panel, and by the end of April into May, this will have already reached the top and be arching up over the top of the pergola. I've got this alongside a lovely Photinia shrub, which has got a beautiful reddish coloured new leaf on it. This is Photinia red robin. Nice contrast to the golden hop behind. So if you want something which is hardy, comes back every year, just cut it down to the ground level at the end of the season. As you move through spring, those new twining stems of golden leaves will work their way up over any sort of structure you've got in your garden to layer on their golden touch. A few weeks ago I bought this lovely little Viola called White Rose Wing from the garden centre, and I planted it up into this hanging basket. Look at that flower, isn't it gorgeous? And I've put the basket in the greenhouse just so that the plants can get established, get well rooted. Once they are well rooted like they are now, I'm going to take this basket and hang it up in the garden. And it's worth doing that with the plants earlier in the year. If you've got some protection like I have with a greenhouse, you can get things potted up early. And now I can take this basket and I'm going to take it up the garden and hang it up to enjoy near at the house. And at the back of my house I've got a hanging basket bracket so that I can hang the basket to enjoy while I'm in the house itself. And I'm going to put this up here now. There we go, up onto the bracket, and now the basket can be enjoyed in all its glory, filling this gap now through from spring before the summer bedding comes into bloom. This provides some really charming little flowers. So I'll enjoy this, and then as we move through into early summer, I can take this basket down and replace it with some flowers to enjoy for the summer. I do like to make the very most of the space in my garden. So underneath the roses in this little rose bed, a centrally positioned one in my parterre garden, I've underplanted the roses themselves with a carpet of Geranium sanguineum. As we move through spring, this hardy cranesbill or hardy geranium, the foliage died down at the end of last year. I cut all of the old growth off at soil level, and now the leaves have grown and carpeted the ground underneath the roses. And as we move through into summer, I'll get a beautiful display of flowers on this little Geranium sanguineum, or it's sometimes called the bloody cranesbill. And this will give me a nice display of flowers. Just sets off the rose bed, makes the most of the space. So if you've got some roses in your garden, into a little bit of ground cover, a carpet of flowers beneath it, then check out the bloody cranesbill, Geranium sanguineum. I love osteospermums for summer colour, and this is Osteospermum Blue-Eyed Beauty. Isn't it gorgeous? I'm going to grow mine in a terracotta pot. Good drainage in a base to make sure the compost doesn't get waterlogged. Layer of gravel's fine. Line the inside of the pot with some bits of old compost back just to stop the compost drying out too quickly. Then a good layer of peat-free compost, into which I'll mix in some slow release fertiliser to keep the plants well fed during the summer. Just mix that into the compost, and then I'll slip the pot off the little osteospermum plant, and I'll use the pot as a template for planting. Make sure the rim of the plastic pot is about an inch below the outer rim of the terracotta pot to make watering easier. Fill in around each of those pots with some more peat-free compost, firm it down lightly with your fingertips, and then you can just twist to remove each of the plastic pots and pop in the root ball of the bedding plants. Just nice, easy way of planting without damaging the shoots of the plants. Just pop the root ball in, push it down. Once you've finished, you can just top up the compost, filling in around with a little bit more compost. As I say, make sure the layer of that compost is just below the rim of the main pot. Water well to settle the compost. I'll grow mine in the greenhouse for a few weeks till they're well established, and then bring them outside to enjoy a wonderful display of summer colour. I hope you're enjoying this video, and if you are, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. It really does help boost the channel and make sure I can produce even more videos like this to enjoy over the months ahead. Thank you very much. Now I've got quite a mix of things in my flower border. The alliums, or the flowering onions, are coming up nicely, already producing flower heads early on in the year. So those will open as we get into early summer. Still got a few muscari or grape hyacinth growing up here. I'm going to have to clear these away. They're smothering my little golden leafed corners here, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of clearing away here. But just as I've got new flowers developing in one part of the border, some of my spring displays have come to an end, like on these narcissus or daffodils. And so once the flowers have finished and they've formed these seed heads, I tend to just pick off the old seed heads themselves, because I don't want the bulbs to be wasting energy making seeds I want all of the energy to go back down into the bulbs themselves. So I think in spring it's worth just going over your flower borders, and if you've got any bulbs which are making old seed heads like these, just pick them off. Leave the stem on, but just take off the old flower heads themselves. Take these off, pick them off, to stop the bulb wasting its energy making seeds. And then you can give these clumps of bulbs a good liquid feed, so that the feed will go down and the bulbs can enjoy that fertilizer in the spring. So I'll leave the leaves on these bulbs and let them die down naturally. Some people want to cut off the leaves of their old daffodils, but it's important to leave them in place as long as possible. If at all possible, leave the leaves on and let them die down before you clear the foliage away. If you really have to clear away the leaves of daffodils and spring bulbs, then let them stay in place for at least 6 weeks or a couple of months, so that the foliage has made food, that food has gone down into the bulb has restocked, and hopefully that will ensure a flower display next year. Now, I pruned my roses probably about 6 weeks ago now, and this is a shrub rose called Gertrude. The stems were shortened, so last year's shoots were cut back, so I cut the stem back to here, and further down the stems now we can see the new shoots already developing. So I cut back here to a bud, and that new shoot is developing up. Follow that stem back down, and I've got side shoots like this developing. Down here is a little bit of growth I pruned back, and I've got new shoots coming on that. So the new growth is coming on the roses now, and this will be carrying flowers later in summer. In fact, on here I've already got one new rose bloom developing. So it's say in my garden, spring pruning, early spring pruning, great for roses, keeping control of the size and shape of your plant. This next to it is a variety of rose called Jeff Hamilton, and again I've shortened it back, but the new growth is coming and the new flower buds are just starting to form. So these will give me the earliest flowers. Deadhead promptly after flowering in summer. You encourage more side shoots and more flowers to form. But for now, how's that for a sign of flowers to come? The Hellebore flowers have been lovely this spring. I've enjoyed their display. Once the flowering's over, Hellebores will set seed. You can see here how every flower started making these seed heads. They look really attractive, don't they? So you can enjoy the display of these right the way through to early summer. But then the seed heads will be fully mature, they will dry and they'll burst open, and they'll drop more seeds down onto the bed. Now, if you don't mind that, you can just let your hellebores seed themselves around your plots. Just let these seed heads ripen up, let them burst open and seeds to fall. If you want, of course, you could collect some of the seeds from inside and sow these to grow on plants in controlled conditions, in a propagator in a pot or something like that. But I just let mine self-seed and the seedlings come up in my border, and I can enjoy their displays in future years. You never know what you're going to get. Now, alongside the hellebores in my shade border is a lovely hardy perennial, the Brunnera Jack Frost. This is the perennial forget-me-not, because if you're familiar with forget-me-not flowers, they've got this similar beautiful blue colouring. And as we move through April into May, you've got the lovely flowering display, but it's the leaf which is so gorgeous on this Brunnera. It's got a silvery, metallic, heart-shaped leaf with that intricate green veining which patterns the leaf beautifully. The leaf itself has that almost metallic sheen to it. Beautiful display of these forget-me-not blue flowers here. Now, Jack Frost is certainly a variety which I'd recommend growing. forms a nice big clump. If I want, I can dig some of the outer pieces up and divide this plant up to enjoy elsewhere in the garden. But arching over the top of the Jack Frost is another hardy perennial called Solomon's Seal. This has got lovely new stems growing up now. It died down completely in the winter, but these new stems are growing by the day, growing up and arching over, and they will give me a beautiful display of arching stems with dainty little white flowers hanging down from the tips. Solomon's Seal is a lovely hardy perennial. Look, we can already see the flowers just starting to develop along the stems of these. Its Latin name, Polygonatum. Solomon's Seal is its common name, and it's certainly worth growing it behind a lower growing perennial at the front. So if you've got a bed with some low perennials at the front, consider putting something like Solomon's Seal behind it so that the stems will grow up and arch over, and these will put on a wonderful display of flowers as we move through spring. My Boulevard Clematis, growing in a pot, is trained up a nice metal spiral obelisk. I haven't actually tied this in at all. The leaf petioles tend to sort of grasp on and clamber and climb up the support. If you do have any wayward shoots, I've got some around here, but I might just get a little bit of garden string, just tie these in gently, but otherwise you could just leave them to produce a more natural display. But a central support is essential, so I've got this metal obelisk pushed well down into the pot to give it some support, and this will support the growth of the clematis as it develops up through spring. And I've got flower buds already forming on here. These will be opening very soon to put on a flowering display to welcome in summer. When it comes to hanging baskets, I like to choose the biggest basket I can. Bigger baskets hold more plants, so I put a saucer in the base to act as a reservoir to collect water before filling with a peat-free compost. Any multi-purpose peat-free compost is fine. I put a good layer of compost in the base. Just firm it down lightly with your fingertips. Get the level about right before you start planting. Then I mix in a generous handful of slow release fertilizer granules. These little granules will gradually dissolve over the summer to release food to keep the plant display going right the way through the summer months. Just mix that lightly into the compost with your fingertips. And now choose which plants you're going to grow. I like to have a back, a middle and a front to my hanging basket. So at the back here, I'm putting quite a tall, bold growing Coleus or Solenostemum. This is one of the Kong series, beautiful variegated leaves on it. On either side of that, I'm going to put a white flowered Pelargonium or a Geranium. These summer flowering plants really keep the display of colour going throughout the months ahead. And I'm going to just gently make a little hole and drop the root ball of the Pelargonium down into that, just firm lightly around with compost, adjusting the height of the plant as you go. Next I'm putting in a pink flowered Nemesia. This has got a really nice root ball of compost. Just make a hole with your hand just to settle that down, so at the level of the compost in the little pot that the Nemesia came in is just below the rim of the liner of the basket there. And the final part of my combination is a bicoloured verbena. Beautiful little flower on this. And just settle these in round the front of the basket itself. Now you can be as generous as you want in baskets. You can cram in quite a lot of plants in them. But just be sensible and give your plants enough room to grow. I can just squeeze in another Nemesia in here. So little hole, a gap in the compost, and just squeeze that root ball in. And once you've got the levels of the plants about right, then it's time to just adjust them slightly just to get the levels right, and now fill in around with more compost. and you just want the top of the compost to be a little bit lower than the edge of the basket line here. Just fill in gently, tease the compost in between the plants, lightly firming it down with your fingers, and mound it up in the middle as well. Just make sure that each of those root balls of plants is completely covered with compost, good firm contact with it as you push it down. And then my final job, once I've finished filling it around, is to water the compost well. And once that's done, I hang my baskets in my greenhouse for a few weeks so that they get well rooted and established before eventually hanging the basket outside in the garden to enjoy throughout the summer. In my pot store behind my pergola arch, I just move the pots for the winter to give them some protection. And now we're moving to the spring. The perennial grasses like the Limnanthes are coming up. The hostas are developing new shoots. And I've got pots of lily bulbs which I let die down naturally in the autumn, and these are now producing their new stems. And I don't repot them every year. Quite often I'll just leave them in the same pot and just give them a good feed and water as we move through the season. But once you're getting through spring, it's worth watching out for one very troublesome pest. There's something which loves eating your lilies, and I was inspecting the shoots of these lilies today, and it's just worth checking over the tips of the shoots. And I noticed there's some little bits being chewed off these leaves here, and if I look closely, let me have a look around here. Can you see that there is down here a little red lily beetle? He's already in there and he will be munching away at my lilies. So inspect your lilies regularly and be on the lookout for these little red devils. You'll have to pick them off and get rid of them. Lily beetle. It's a pest you'll find quite often around your garden through the summer, and this little beetle also nibbles away at the leaves of fritillarias. It crawls, but it also flies, so it could fly off at any moment. It will lay its eggs, the adult eats the leaves, the eggs hatch into larvae, they eat the leaves. It's a horrible little pest, so if you spot them around your garden, you've got to get rid of them. Now in the autumn I had a lovely display of flowers from this bulb called a Colchicum. This is a variety called water lily, and it's planted at the front of one of my flower borders, just in front of a little cornice called Kelsey Gold. In the autumn, the Colchicum, or naked ladies as it's sometimes called, naked because you get the flowers without the leaves in the autumn. So I enjoyed the water lily Colchicum flowers in the autumn, and as we move through spring, this clump now produces its leaves. So let it do its thing. The leaves will be stocking up the underground bulb, and then they will die down. I better clear away the leaves from the Colchicum, clear these away, let them do their thing at the moment, stocking up the bulb, and then I'll clear away the leaves completely. And then as we move through into autumn, I'll get another display of lovely flowers developing. I think I've mentioned this before, but when you've got evergreen shrubs, particularly variegated ones, they've got a nasty habit. And on this euonymus, it has a habit of the variegated variety producing these plain green stems of leaves. And what I don't want is for this green growth to take over the plant. What I love is the variegated nature of this particular euonymus. So if you do notice any green shoots developing, I'm going to go and find my secateurs and cut that right the way down at its base and remove it, so that the green growth, which often is stronger growing, doesn't take over and smother the plant, and the plant will revert back from its beautiful variegated habit to the unwanted green growth of this variety. So check over your variegated shrubs regularly through the year, and if you notice that any of them have got reverted shoots, reverting back to the green, cut these out right away. So I use a specific Ericaceous Feed for azaleas, camellias, rhododendrons. Lots of different ones on the market. This one comes as a powder, and I've got to get the little scoop out from inside the packet. I need 2 scoops in a watering can, so a couple of scoops of the fertiliser, which I'll dilute in water. It's a 2-gallon watering can, so just dilute this up with water to mix up and make the liquid feed for feeding my ericaceous plants. And then you can just give each of your plants a really good drench with the ericaceous plant food. I've got rhododendrons and camellias and a host of other acid lovers in this bed, and the fertiliser provides all of the essential nutrients and the micronutrients that the plants need to make sure that you keep the growth healthy, the leaves nice and green, and it will encourage good flowering performance every year too. And it says you can give the plants a feed every 2 or 3 weeks through the year, so treat your plants, feed them regularly, ensure you get the very best from them. One of my favourite ornamental garden trees is the Japanese maple, and I've got a new variegated variety now which I'm going to grow on in a patio pot as a patio feature for a few years. It ultimately might get too big, I'll have to put it in a bigger pot or even plant it out in the garden, but I think for a few years now this ornamental tree will form a lovely patio feature. I've got several Japanese maples in my garden, some green leaf ones, purple leaf ones, and also a beautiful golden leaf variety called Acer aureum. That started off in a pot and was planted out in the garden when it got a little bit too big, but today I'm going to plant this variegated form in a pot. Now I like growing things in terracotta. I like terracotta because it's a nice natural material, but it's also quite weighty and stable. So if you've got a small tree growing in a pot, you don't want it to blow over in summer storms. So I think the pot itself provides more weight and therefore more stability to the plant itself. The other thing I'm going to do for maples is they like an acid soil. And so I'm going to use an ericaceous planting compost to put it into rather than just an ordinary multi-purpose compost. I think an acid or an ericaceous compost will be perfect for planting up this maple. Now this pot has got a drainage hole in the base. It's always important that pots have. Usually they come with them. If you were using a plastic pot instead, you could drill some holes in the bottom. So you can use plastic, it's fine, but I'll probably put some stones in the bottom to provide some more weight and stability. I don't want the compost to fall through the bottom of the hole in the pot there, so I'm going to cover that with some pieces of just some old pieces of broken terracotta pot and just put those over the drainage holes there to stop the compost from falling out through the holes. And then I'm going to pour in some grit, and this is going to cover over the terracotta, and this layer of grit in the bottom of the pot just provides extra drainage so that the root ball isn't going to be sitting directly into any water. Any rain or water is going to drain away from the bottom, so always put a layer of grit in the bottom of the pot first. And then with terracotta, I find that it is a porous material, but some plants like it drier and some plants like it wetter. So if I was growing, for instance, some pelargoniums, some summer geraniums in a pot, you might just leave the pot as it is. It doesn't matter if the compost dries out a little bit. But with this, I don't want the compost to dry out completely, so I'm going to line the inside of the pot itself just with some old pieces of compost bag, which I've cut up before I fill it with compost. And this just makes sure that the compost isn't in direct contact with the pot itself. The compost won't dry out overly quickly, so I'm just going to line the inside of the pot with that. That should be about right. and then I can put in my first bit of compost. Now, quite often when I've got plants, I will just take off the pot from the root ball, just so I can use the pot as a template. If I take that off, I can see that this Japanese maple's got a nice root system developing there. And you just need to put compost in the pot, good layer in first, and then adjust the height of the pot itself. So I'm going to put in a layer of compost, firm it down a little bit with my fingertips, but not overly firm it in there. Check the height, still a bit too deep, a bit more compost in there. And that is the nice thing about doing it in this way, just to get the height. What I'm trying to do is to make sure that the level of the compost in this is about a couple of inches below the rim of the pot, so that I've got room to pour water in and water the compost in the summer. So just checking here now, that, just firm it down a bit, is about the right height for the plants to be. And then I'm going to fill in around the pot itself with more compost. Keeping the pot in position, but just filling in around. Just firming down with your fingertips. Just put this in. And this, I find this is just slightly easier way of potting up big plants, so that I'm not going to damage the branches of the maple as I'm filling the pot with compost. There is always a risk that you bash the plant and you snap off a stem, or you break a little bit away. But keeping the pot in here as a mould of the shape and size of the root ball of the maple, just means I can fill in with compost until this reaches the desired height. And once it does, again, just check the finished level of the compost. I can cut off any bits of old compost bag at the end if I want a little bit more compost around the side here. And that just firmed in around means that the last thing I can do is to just take that plant pot out and leave a mould the shape of the root ball. Before I drop this into the root ball, I'm just going to check there's no weeds on the surface here. A little bit of moss. You can just pinch off any weeds or any rubbish from the surface of the compost you want. And now I can drop the root ball of the maple down into the hole that I'd made, firm the compost down around it, make sure it's vertical, it's in the right position, top up with a little bit more compost over the top just to finish that off. And then you've got that nice little maple in a pot to brighten up the patio. My last job is to water it well, and just water around the whole of the compost to not only moisten the compost, but to settle it in around the root ball of the maple itself. Just make sure there's no air pockets in there and the compost is thoroughly wet. And there we have it. Japanese maple in a pot, nice little feature. Looking forward to watching the leaves unfurl and putting on a nice display to cheer up my patio over the coming months. I really hope you're enjoying this video, and if you are, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel at Adam's Gardening Guides. That helps me produce even more inspiring videos just for you. The dahlia tubers that I potted up earlier in the year are growing up nicely now. Plenty of lovely new shoots on this pink princess variety. And I've also got down here a variety called Bishop of York. Again, lots of new growth and new stems developing. Now I'm going to leave all of these shoots on here. If you're a keen propagator, then you can actually cut off these new shoots and root them as cuttings and grow a number of plants. So I could get 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 cuttings off this plant, about 4 or 5 off that one as well. But I'm going to grow these in a pot, so I'm going to leave all the shoots on there. The only thing I've got to do over the course of the spring, and at the moment this pot is in my unheated greenhouse, is just to keep it watered, and I will probably start giving it a feed in a few weeks' time as well, just to boost growth, so that this potted dahlia can put on a good flowering display on my patio. I've just received a delivery of some new hardy herbaceous perennials by post, which I'm going to plant in my garden for the summer. I've got a Rudbeckia called Laciniata herbston, and I've also got a Astrantia or masterwort. This one's Astrantia major large white. Now the plants themselves are quite small. You could plant these straight into your borders if you want, but I would much rather pot them up and grow them on into a larger well-rooted pot, so they've got a bigger plant, an established plant to put out in the borders. If I plant something like that out in my border, it's likely to get smothered and not flourish, so I'm going to pot these up into a bigger pot. Now, this pot should be ideal, because if you just look here, if I plant this small plant in there, I've got room for compost all around, so that should be just about the right size to grow on this Rudbeckia. So what I'm going to do is, as I always do with things in pots, is to take the plant out of its pot so that I can just check the root ball in here. Look at that beautiful root development on there, so that plant's going to grow away nicely. But I'm going to use a multi-purpose peat-free compost, put a layer in the bottom of the pot, use the outer pot as a template just to fill in around this with some compost, and firm it down with your fingertips. Don't firm it overly, you don't want to make it rock hard, but just fill in around until you've filled all the gaps in there. Just push down with your fingertips to make sure there aren't any air pockets in there. Fill right up to the top, and as you can see, I've adjusted the height of the pot so it's just sitting a little bit deeper than the outer pot it's in. Then I can just pull this pot out, leaving a square template in there, and pop in the root ball of the Rudbeckia. Tap it well, give it a water, and grow this on to a larger size, ready to plant out into my garden later in early summer. And do check carefully when you're potting up plants. There's a slug hiding away at the bottom of this pot, so that's something I don't want climbing up and eating the young plants as they're developing, so I'm going to get rid of that. It is lovely when blossom time arrives, and a really welcome sight when you see the apple blossom developing, because hopefully that means a good crop of fruits to enjoy later in the summer. This variety is one of the column, the upright vertical growing apples. I think this variety is called Charlotte. Lovely good crop of flowers developing, beautiful blossom which is growing through April, and what I hope now is that the bees are going to discover these flowers, pollinate the apple, and I'll get good crops for picking in the autumn. Now, some varieties of apple have self-pollinating habits, which means that when it flowers, the pollen can actually pollinate its own bloom. But there are varieties which need to be cross-pollinated, so if I've got one apple tree, and here it's trained as a cordon along the side of my path, but if one is in flower, it needs a neighbouring apple to be in flower at the same time. So the insects can take pollen from one variety and move it across to another, cross-pollinating the variety. So on my plot I've got some varieties of fruit which are self-fertile, which just means that if the insects visit the flowers, it will help to pollinate itself, but you can get much better pollination, much better fruit set if you grow more than one variety, but make sure you choose varieties that flower at exactly the same time, so that when one is in flower, so is the other, and the bees and pollinating insects will be able to carry and transfer pollen from one variety to another, and that will guarantee you the very, very best fruit set. And if you ever read about people saying apples in pink buds, this is the pink bud stage, and this will open to the open flower stage. And at this stage, this is when fruit blossom can be most susceptible to frost damage at night. So if you do live in a very cold area and frost is forecast, you could get a piece of garden fleece and hang that down over the trained fruit tree. If it's a small trained variety like this, it's easier to get a piece of fleece and hang it to protect the flowers at night, keep the frost off the blooms to ensure they're not damaged, and then they will set fruit by being pollinated and guarantee you a good crop. And another tree covered in blossom at the moment is my pear. This is a variety called Concord, and it's a self-fertile variety of pear. I think it was bred as a cross between a conference pear and a commis pear. It's very like a conference when you eat it. This will have some good crops, probably ripe for picking in about October time in my garden, but the blossom is coming through end of March into April. As I say, it's self-fertile, so I only need to grow one pear tree in the garden, but the flowers still need the bees and pollinating insects to visit to pollinate the flowers. The tree stayed nice and compact. I think I've had it here for a good 20 years now. I grow a lovely clematis at the base. This is a variety called Dr. Rupel, and I've just planted it at the base of the pear tree so that the stems will grow up and these will get hold into the lower branches to layer on a little bit of flower, which is a bit fun to have. If you've got some fruit trees, why not train some clematis up them as well? But at this time of year, so moving into spring, the blossom's coming. I want the bees to pollinate those blooms so I get a really good crop of this pear called Concord for picking later in the autumn. The branches, I just haven't pruned it at all actually. I just let these branches arch over and round. I can walk underneath this through my vegetable plot to just enjoy a small fruiting tree, single tree growing here on my plot. Look forward to those crops as well as we move through into autumn. And alongside the raspberries, I've got a variety of fruit called a Fourberry with these lovely golden flowers. This flowers in spring and it will set fruit, which is a little bit like a black currant. And I leave the growth, the stems and the canes on it every year, and it flowers up beautifully to produce crops for picking later in the summer. Around my veg plot, I've got some lovely clumps of seedlings coming up. And this is a hardy annual called the poached egg flower, and I just let it grow, flower and set seed. So here along the edge of my plot where I've got some raspberries, the poached egg flowers grew last year. It's a beautiful little flower on this hardy annual. I let the flowers develop, the bees adore feeding from them, and then once it's finished flowering I just let it die down naturally and the seeds fall to the ground and they grow up again the next year to give me further flowers for the insects to enjoy around my vegetable plot. I'm looking forward to some crops of climbing beans through the summer, so now I'm going to get my plant supports in place. I've built a timber A-frame that goes over my vegetable bed, and then I tie in canes on either side to produce a nice A-frame wigwam to support the beans as they grow. Spacing the canes about 6 to 8 inches apart. You don't have to be too fussy. Once the frame's in place later in May, I can sow the seeds directly into the soil at the base of each of the canes. You can start plants off in pots if you want, raise them under glass or on a windowsill, plant them out. I'm going to sow my beans directly outside. Keep the crop well watered through the summer as well. Beans really want lots of water. They'll climb up the canes and give me some good summer pickings. If you found in the past that your beans run out of steam, then try successionally sowing a second crop in a month or two's time so that those will grow on and give you a slightly later crop than the early sowings. Rhubarb is such an undemanding crop. I've got several clumps around the garden here. Look at these beautiful stems here now, ready for picking. And to pick rhubarb, literally all you got to do is to grasp the stem at the bottom, just ease it backwards and forwards a little bit and pull it away. And there, look at these beautiful coloured stems. So I'll pick some of those. Some of my rhubarb, like this one, I've just got out in the vegetable garden, just growing outside. But you can also get forcing jars, like this nice terracotta forcing jar, which you can put over your clumps of rhubarb. And what this does is excludes light. And by excluding light, you'll hopefully get taller, longer stems rhubarb for picking. So if you just check under here now, yeah, the rhubarbs come up to the top, and what they've got to do with these is just put your hand down inside and grasp it at the bottom. Let me just give that a tug. There we go. And then you'll get some lovely, tall, tender stems of rhubarb to cook and enjoy. And I'll enjoy cooking that later and have a little bit of rhubarb for my tea. Few things can be more rewarding when you're gardening than growing your own fruit. Strawberries are one of my favourites, and you can grow these in beds outside on your veg plot or your fruit plot. You could grow them in growing bags, or you can grow them on the patio or in the greenhouse like I'm here, just simply in pots. Now, strawberries can be bought as growing plants in garden centres, or you can buy what are called strawberry runners from mail order suppliers. And a strawberry runner comes in the post, is basically a young strawberry plant. These are misted tip, cold stored runners. And it's a variety I'm growing this year called flamenco. This is an ever-bearing variety. And you can get varieties of strawberries that flower in different seasons of the summer, or this particular variety called flamenco, as I say, will produce fruits in flushes through summer and into autumn. This is how you buy them. So I bought a pack of 12 of these lovely little runner plants, and I'm going to plant 2 in each pot so that they should give me some fruits this summer, and these will flower and fruit within a few months of planting, and the plants will get bigger. I'll overwinter them, and next year I'll get an even bigger crop. And the lovely thing about growing strawberries is that you can keep the plants cropping for several years before they slowly deteriorate and they'll get virus diseases and so on, and the fruiting will diminish over time. Now, my strawberry plants need to be planted in pots of compost. So I'm going to put these to one side. And the compost I'm going to use is going to be a combination of things. In a pot, you need a free draining compost, but it's be a compost that retains moisture and it's got good nutrition too. So I'm mixing together today some loam-based John Innes compost. This is John Innes number 3. I've got a peat-free compost, which has got lots of nice organic matter in it. And I'm going to mix in with that a material called vermiculite. Now, vermiculite is a man-made material which is heat treated and turns it into this sort of mica vermiculite, and this opens up the compost, stops it getting too waterlogged, but it does retain some moisture of its own, so it's a really good additional material to put in the compost. So today I'm going to mix together 1 part or 1 pot of this John Innes number 3 compost. I'm going to mix into that 1 pot of peat-free multi-purpose compost. Mix these 2 in to one another, and then I'm also going to add about the same amount, about a pot full of vermiculite. So just pour this onto the compost, about the same amount of volume as the other two, thereabouts. Don't have to be too exact, and all three of these ingredients can be mixed in together. Now once you think you've got a nice even mix consistency, you can fill a pot. These have got drainage holes in the bottom. I've chosen a plastic pot and just have to fill this up about 2/3 full. And as I say, I'm going to plant 2 of these strawberry runners in each pot. So just 2 decent sized plants. Now these plants have got a new shoot developing at the top, and they've got a good root system. If the roots are very dry, you could soak these in water just to hydrate them a bit, but they'll soon get moist when you put them in a pot. And in the pot itself, I'm just going to make a nice deep channel right the way down to the base of the pot, and I'm going to put 1 plant on each side. So just open the roots up a bit, put the plant in the pot. I need to keep the top of the plant, that little crown of the plant where it would have been planted in the ground outside, I want to keep that level with the surface of the compost. So at that point there, just make sure you don't bury it any deeper. Spread the roots out in the pot itself, get some more compost and cover over the roots. And I'm going to put 1 plant on each side of this pot. First one in. I'll get the level of it adjusted in a minute. And the second plant, again, just tease that one over. Get deep down because you want these roots to go right down into the compost itself. Spread the roots out a bit as you go. New shoot already starting at the top of the plant. So just open the roots up, spread them out through the compost, and fill in around those roots with some more compost. Level it down. Now I'm just going to adjust the heights of those 2 little strawberry runners. As I said before, you can't plant them too deeply. You don't want to bury it. I want it about the same level as it was grown on the nursery. Burn the compost down. And that's about it. All I've now got to do is to water the pot, keep it moist, make sure it doesn't dry out. I'm going to keep these pots in my greenhouse. You could put them in a frame, you could put them on your patio, you can put them wherever you like. In the greenhouse, it will be a little bit warmer. They should start growing and flowering a bit sooner, and I'll have fruits. If plants are planted around about April time, you should be picking some fruits June into July. And being an ever-bearing variety, this one should go on giving me some pickings into the autumn. Potted strawberries can continue cropping for several years. I leave my pots outside for most of the winter because the cold treatment encourages the flower buds to form in the crowns of the strawberries. So I leave them outside and I bring them into my greenhouse earlier in the year to start putting on new growth and to start flowering. But then the important thing to consider is that the flowers of strawberries need to be pollinated. If all I do is keep them in the greenhouse with the doors closed, quite often there's few pollinating insects around. So I stand the pots outside during the day, or if they're in the greenhouse, I open up the vents and the doors so that bees and beneficial insects can fly in. And they will visit the flowers and pollinate the flowers to make sure that the fruit forms correctly. You might have noticed in the past you get some abnormal shaped strawberries, and that can be due to poor pollination. So what we need is good pollination, and that needs bees and hoverflies and other beneficial insects to come in and visit the blooms. Once they're at this stage, I also feed regularly. Anything growing in a pot needs feeding, whether that's bedding plants on the patio, it's hanging baskets, it's tomatoes or cucumbers and things in the greenhouse. And I tend to use a high potash fertiliser for lots of my greenhouse crops. You can use it for your bedding plants and your hanging baskets too. This has got a balance of nutrients in it, but it's got a lot of potash. And for good flower and fruit production, you need potash. Plants need the nitrogen to get good leafy growth, phosphates for roots, but lots of potash for the flowers and fruit. So I can use this around the greenhouse. I can use it for my tomatoes, for my chilies, for my peppers, for my cucumbers, as well as the summer bedding plants and the flowers, but particularly to keep my strawberry plants healthy and encourage lots of flower production. Now you can get strawberries that flower and fruit at different seasons. You can get ones that flower and fruit in early summer, in high summer, or I do like these perpetual fruited varieties, like this variety of flamenco that I'm growing. This will flower and therefore fruit over a longer period of time. So it will give me a succession of pickings through the whole of summer and into autumn. I'll get flushes of flowers and fruits developing, so it gives me fruits little and often through the summer. So I do thoroughly recommend you check out these. If you want some early fruits, then of course get some early fruited varieties, but if you want pickings over a longer period of time, these ever-bearing or perpetual fruiting varieties are certainly worth considering. Now, as well as growing strawberries in pots, which does have the advantage that you can bring the pots under cover to keep the birds away, I am going to plant up this little strawberry bed here, and hopefully I'll produce another video that you'll find on my Adam's Gardening Guides YouTube channel, which shows you just that. I'm going to cover the bed with a weed suppressing membrane and plant the strawberries in here, and then put a frame over the top to cover with netting and keep the birds away. And you can buy little strawberry plants like this Cambridge favourite from garden centres with fruits already setting on it. It flowered well and it's fruiting well, and as you can see, I mentioned runners before, you've already got some runners developing on these plants. And once a little plant forms at the end of that runner, I'll peg that down into a separate pot of compost to root and make some new plants. So I'll be planting these out, and I've also got some little trays of strawberries too. Just look for the best value plants that you can get. This is a variety called Symphony. Again, the young plants probably will already have some flowers and some fruits developing, so try and choose plants with the biggest crown you can to plant out. So this little bed here will be planted with strawberries, and there'll be a new video coming to my channel very soon. So if you've got somewhere under cover, keep your pots perhaps in a greenhouse where it's warmer, away from birds. Let the pollinating insects come in and pollinate the flowers. Enjoy lovely clean pickings, which also stay quite disease free because it's drier in the greenhouse. The fruits stay dry, they don't get wet in the rain, they don't get the grey mould that can develop on outdoor crops sometimes when it's been raining. Once they've finished fruiting later in the autumn, what I'll do is I'll let them die down naturally, and I'll cut off all of the leaves for the winter. Now I tend to stand my pots outside, just in a little sheltered corner of my patio area down by my greenhouse for the winter. They don't mind the cold, they're hardy plants, quite hardy outside, so that the cold won't hurt them, but you don't want them to get too waterlogged. All the leaves have been cut off, and the cold weather actually encourages the flowers to form in the crown of the strawberry, which will open the following spring and summer and give you fruits the following year. So I'll leave them outside for the winter. Come the spring, I'll bring them under cover, bring them to warmth in a cold frame, put them on your patio, encourage them into early growth if you possibly can, because earlier growth means earlier flowering and earlier fruiting, so you'll enjoy fruits earlier in the summer. And the cycle repeats itself. Keep the pots well watered and fed. Compost in pots has very little nutrient in it, so all of those nutrients will have been used up after 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. So you must remember to feed regularly to ensure the growth of the plant is strong and the flowering is good. Then I think in pots, strawberries can last for a good 3 to 4 years before sometimes you'll notice the fruiting potential starts to drop off. So you can get good value once you've invested in your strawberry crowns. You can get several good years of pickings from them. As I said, The plants will form runners. You can root those runners, you can get new plants for free and build up your stock of strawberries in that way. Thanks for watching, and I hope that's given you a few ideas on growing your own strawberries in pots. And if you keep tuned into my YouTube channel at Adam's Gardening Guides, I'll develop a new video on growing strawberries outside in a strawberry bed too. But for now, these strawberries in pots will give me some really lovely, tasty homegrown pickings. So have a go yourself. Try growing your own strawberries and enjoy your own homegrown crops. Whatever you're doing in the garden this summer, enjoy your garden. Thanks for joining me. One job to do as we move through into early summer is to feed your lawn. And I use a soluble plant food using a diluter which attaches to my garden hose. And all you've got to do is to put the feed in the packet into the feeder, pop on the top, and then if I attach the hose to this, as I turn the tap on and water passes through the feeder, it dilutes the feed and feeds the lawn. So all I've now got to do is to walk up and down the lawn, just spreading the liquid feed solution over the lawn, giving the lawn a good soak. This will ensure I get lovely green grass, thick strong growth right the way through summer. And you can repeat this at intervals if your lawn needs it, to make sure you give your lawn a really good boost of feed. Certainly a good job to do in early summer. The young plants will need some support as they grow, so get a cane and push it down into the pot close to the main stem, and then just use some garden string to tie the stem as it develops right up to the top of the cane. Just gives it more support, stops it getting weak and bending over and breaking. And then the plants can be potted up. So once they're really well rooted into their 3 or 4 inch pots, you can move them up into a larger size container to grow for the summer. Use a good peat-free multi-purpose compost, layer of compost in the bottom of the pot. Just check the height. You want to plant it perhaps a little bit deeper than it was in its main pot. Put the plant centrally in the big pot and then fill in around it with compost. Just ease the compost in around the root ball and firm it with your fingertips so it's in really close contact. Just go on feeding the compost in around it. Firm it down, just get right up to just below the rim of the pot. That should be absolutely fine. Now these tomatoes are going to be grown as single stemmed cordons in the greenhouse. So I don't want any side shoots to develop, and you can just pinch these off as they develop. Check regularly in the axial of every leaf where it joins the main stem and pinch out all the side shoots. I'm always keen to make the very most of my vegetable plot, and that means getting the successional sowings and plantings and croppings developed. So earlier in the year I use these modular trays to fill with compost and sow seeds to grow in my greenhouse or on your windowsills or wherever, to get seedlings to give you the earliest picking. So I sowed a tray like this a few weeks ago with some rocket and some watercress, and these lovely little plug plants are ready now for planting out in my cold frame. And the thing about getting the better in your plot is sowing little and often. So a tray like this I will plant out, and about 6 weeks to 8 weeks after sowing the first lot, I'll sow another lot so that I've got a successional crop. So I'm going to plant these out in my cold frame here, but I'll have another tray sown in my greenhouse to develop seedlings so that when this lot has finished cropping, I can replace them with some new plants. So now let's get on and plant these out. I've raked over and prepared the soil in this bed, so now I can get ready for planting. This is a variety of rocket called cultivato, cultivated rocket. It's an Italian seed variety. So all I've done is to put a pinch of seeds into each of these modules. So I've got some lovely little plug plants for planting out, and you just have to make a little hole in the soil or compost and just tease the soil back around it. I'm going to space them out about 10 inches, foot apart or so. So each of these modules has got room to grow and develop. You don't have to be too fussy about the spacings, but I find if you put them in too close, then there's so much competition between plants that you don't actually get a very good crop. So space them out, lots of seedlings in here. And the nice thing about growing a little plug of seedlings like this is I can start by picking off some of these seedlings to enjoy in salads, and then I can leave some of the other plants to grow up and mature. Once the crops are planted, you can just water gently. I like to use one of these hose guns, just set to a gentle shower, and I tend to water the compost right the way around each plug in turn to settle the soil compost around the root ball of the plug and just make sure it's got good contact with the surrounding soil. Keep these watered as is required, so I'll check in the frame every few days. If the compost looks like it's dry or the weather's been very hot and sunny, they might need a little bit more water. Otherwise probably need a really good thorough watering during the springtime, maybe a couple of times a week, just to keep them growing strongly. I will start picking these young leaves while they're still small, but I will wait for some of the others to grow bigger to give me pickings over the coming weeks and months. Sometimes you want green in the garden, and green provides a lovely foil for other things. I've got a host of evergreens and deciduous shrubs in my garden. I've got an evergreen called Dahlia racemosa, this part of the border, which stays green all year round, alongside a nice little lilac which has been deciduous, lost its leaves in the winter, new leaves have grown, and I'll get some flowers coming. Just see the new flowers developing later in late spring to early summer. But at the back here, look at that. Isn't that a wonderful flowering shrub? This is the Mexican orange blossom Choisya ternate, which has wonderfully fragrant white flowers. These are starting to open now to put on a glorious display, set off by that shiny green leaf. But the flowers themselves look lovely in spring. I do like white through springtime, and this will give you that nice backdrop to the border. And it's nice having the flowers at this time of year, because as we move through into the summer, the main flower border will start producing flowers from all the hardy perennials which are now coming up. But at this time of year, the Choisya is in flower, and I can just smell that wonderful fragrance now. A gorgeous hardy shrub. I've got this post and wire support system running right the way down the length of my garden to divide off my parterres from my greenhouse, and this is trained with cane fruits. There's a mix on here of hybrid berries like loganberry and Tayberry, and at the far end thornless blackberry. In fact, all of these fruits are thornless. And as we move through April into early May, the first of these cane fruits starts to flower, and I've got the loganberry producing its first flowers. Lots of flower buds developing, but these open flowers will be pollinated, and these will give me some of my earliest pickings, probably June into July. And I want the continuity of pickings of my fruit in my garden, so Tayberry and loganberry give you the earliest flowers and therefore the earliest fruits. The far end, lots of flowers up here. Look at that, it's going to get a really good crop on these canes which are trained in. And then I've got the thornless blackberry at this end. Here we are, flower buds developing but no open blooms yet, and these flower successionally through the summer, so they give you pickings right the way through into late summer and autumn. So just a simple post and wire support training your cane fruits up to give you a long season of pickings by planting several different varieties together, training up the canes. Canes develop one year and carry flowers and fruits the second year. So these are the fruiting canes, which are going to give me crops to pick this year. And if I look down to the base here on this loganberry, you can see I've already got the new canes developing up, and it's these new canes which are going to train up this year, and these will carry fruits next year. So once the canes up here have finished fruiting, I'll prune these away completely, and then the new canes which grow up from the base will be trained in, and these will carry flowers and fruits next year. So you've got this cycle: new growth one year, trained in to carry flowers and fruits the second year. I really hope you're enjoying this video, and if you are, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. That helps me produce even more inspiring videos just for you.